Okay, we know that heavy metal isn't pop music, which means that we're not barraged with consistent information about what our favorite stars had for dinner last night, unless, of course, their names are Corey Taylor, Carrie King, or Gene Simmons. However, there have been times that heavy metal has made it into the news, and it's usually not been in the best of lights. So here we are. Here are 10 times that heavy metal made it to the mainstream news, and they weren't exactly in the best of ways. Number 10, the Iron Maiden Black Sabbath egg-throwing incident. Ozzfest is one of the most celebrated, if not the most celebrated concert event in America for heavy metal, and was for quite some time. It was a festival where the Osbournes seemed to look at upstart bands as well as seasoned vets in order to put together a metal extravaganza for all to behold, with Mayhem Fest trying to follow suit afterward and just never getting as much acclaim, before, of course, its ultimate destruction last year. Thanks a lot, you bastards. However, in the mid-2000s, Iron Maiden was on the bill, and apparently the Osbournes felt that they were upstaging Black Sabbath a little bit, and had made some defamatory remarks toward Ozzy Osbourne. As a result of this, in the Los Angeles show of that year's Ozzfest, Sharon Osbourne and her daughter decided to unplug Iron Maiden's PA system multiple times, causing a disruption until eventually pelting them with eggs. This was an event that was covered through most news sites, such as Yahoo News, considering this was right at the dawn of the social media revolution, with sites such as MySpace and Facebook first starting to get their feet wet with the medium. And it was one where still to this day there are folks that do not forgive Kelly and Sharon Osbourne for their crime. Number 9, Ozzy Osbourne bites the head off the bat. The 1980s. What a time. Cocaine was big, Ozzy Osbourne was big, and was doing a lot of cocaine. There was no social media, and really, as a result, stories such as this one become legend before eventually proven to be true. As it was stated in 1982, Ozzy Osbourne was performing a show and was a bit hungry, considering a fan threw a bat up on the stage, in which Ozzy Osbourne must have, misthought as a burnt grilled cheese sandwich, considering he picked it up and decided to simply bite the head off. Eventually, Ozzy Osbourne stated he believed that it was a rubber bat and didn't know until otherwise. However, there had been a secondary story that stated that he also bit the head off of a dove, and this one was done more so for promotion. Either way, Ozzy Osbourne in the early 1980s was batshit crazy. And, this could have easily been a great Say No to Drugs campaign. Number 8, the Montreal riots. This is an example of one terrible event happening and then being sort of coupled with another event that's also not good, leading to tragedy. In the Montreal tour stop for the Metallica and Guns N' Roses huge tour extravaganza, where Metallica was pimping the Black Album and Guns N' Roses the Use Your Illusion duality of albums, James Hetfield had an unfortunate accident that involved a pyro that exploded directly within him. It was a new pyro that he was unaware of its existence. It blew right up in his face as the band began fade to black. It was to the point where James Hetfield had second to third degree burns, and the band, as a result, could not continue. Now, as a result of this, the concert event and the organizers decided the best idea was to have Guns N' Roses get on the stage immediately to keep the crowd from getting unruly. However, they didn't take the time to really test out their equipment and make sure everything was running perfectly. Early on through their set, Guns N' Roses couldn't really hear themselves. Axl was having voice problems that would eventually be diagnosed as a legitimate throat issue, and the band also left stage early, citing a lot of complaints of this variety. This caused people to take to the streets of Montreal, overturning cars, looting stores, setting fires. And this is something that also happened prior to the social media age. However, there have been documentary footage found for a Metallica documentary, as well as media and music news, such as MTV News, that covered the incident. Number 7, the Randy Blythe scenario. This was very recent and showcased that 2013 was just such a fantastic year for music. Oh, yeah. While overseas on tour, Randy Blythe had to encounter a fan that jumped on the stage and was being disruptive. And as the story goes, he pushed the fan off, who landed on his head and subsequently died. Randy Blythe actually spent time in jail overseas for this, where he wrote a book and actually wrote some of the material that ended up on their latest record from 2015, 7 Strung Undrunk. So, As a result of this, Randy Blythe was the subject of many hashtags, including Free Randy, which we saw previously for folks such as Lil Wayne whenever he ended up in jail with Free Wheezy. Randy, being such a ambassador and a large name of the new wave of modern American thrash metal or modern American metal, is one of the reasons why this actually broke through into the national media, but also because it was a bit of an international incident. Eventually, Randy got off and is now back with the band, but not before we had quite a long period of time where there was uncertainty surrounding Randy's fate. But also in 2013, we had another lovely incident, and that was number 6. Tim Lembestis puts a hit out on his own wife. Tim Lembestis apparently didn't like his wife very much during this time, and Tim kind of wanted her to die. So Tim consulted somebody who he thought was a hitman, but was also was really an undercover police officer. Tim was arrested, and the whole world got to see that Tim may just not like Jesus as much as people think. Not because he decided to go satanic in some sort of statement, no, but it's that whole thou shalt not kill thing that he really seems to have problems with. Even though, I guess, technically speaking, he wouldn't have been the one doing the killing, he would have called for the hit. This is another great example that 2013 was just a terrible year for the genre of rock and metal, considering we also had the Ian Watkins calamity that occurred in November of that year, where he and a woman decided they were going to rape a 1-year-old. Thank God 2013 is over. Number 5, the black metal church burnings of the early 1990s. Now, this was one that got a lot of coverage based around the religious aspect here in America, but overseas, this was something that was considered a bit of terrorism. This is one that really in 2016, the word terrorist would easily be thrown around, even though it was merely black metal. Now, a lot of people that supported the first wave of black metal, including folks such as Euronymous and Varg Vikernes, were going around and were torching churches to the ground in Norway. And this was such a large example of this going on. It was also part of the black metal culture of trying to one-up one another, that it was gaining a lot of attention from the news, not only in Norway, but also worldwide, with fear that it was going to spread to other corners of the globe. Black metal, of course, started its rise to actual prominence, but then also had to encounter a number of freaking moments where the news could have easily covered them with a lot more fervor, but did not. That brings us to number 4, the murder of Euronymous, which is probably one of the most famous examples of this. However, there have been even more legendary things that have happened to this day that could easily be assembled into one list, and it has been on sites such as Metal Injection. However, the murder of Euronymous is one of the examples and earliest examples of one band member killing another band member, even though they might not necessarily be in the same band. They did have some collaboratory efforts. This showcased that there was a lot of unrest that was going on at this time. Of course, everybody knows the story that Varg Vikernes went over to Euronymous' home in order to perhaps sign a contract. There have been varied instances of what exactly was slated to go down that evening, but eventually what ended up happening was Vikernes stabbing Euronymous to death multiple times, including the kill shot, which went straight between his forehead. Vikernes, of course, eventually would get 21 years, the maximum penalty for the murder of his friend, and whenever the sentence was carried out, the smile that you saw from Varg has now become one of the most infamous images in heavy metal history. Now, as I stated, there have been other horrible moments that have been associated with black metal that could easily be assembled into its own list. However, that's been already done by other sources, but maybe we'll do one in the future, considering black metal is just fucking bonkers. Number 3, Columbine, and this is where things go from perhaps having a little bit of history where there could be some cheekiness to not at all. Columbine was not something that was directly associated with any metal band whatsoever here in America. Of course, this was the school shooting that occurred in Colorado, for those who are unaware of what Columbine means. Where heavy metal starts to infuse itself into this story is in the media representation or in the media handlement of the following months that occurred when the investigation was taking place. Eventually, what ended up happening was it sounded very much, and this was the spin that felt like it was being kind of turned in the washing machine of the media. It felt very much like this murder was being blamed on video games such as Doom, heavy metal music such as Rammstein and Marilyn Manson, and just an overall love of guns and trench coats. The gothic subculture and other darker subcultures took a major hit in this case. It got to the point where, in the middle of the 2000s, walking down a hallway wearing a trench coat, black clothes, saying that you were a metal fan became a little bit of a trial. It became something where you had to watch your ass a little bit. And this was because of the media spin. Heavy metal, of course, in the 2000s has been able to recover very nicely after the 90s made it seem like, at least in America, it was dying, which, of course, has been furthest from the case, considering it was growing into a more powerful monster. However, this was something in Columbine that caused a lot of harm to a lot more people, and that's the reason why it's so high up on this list. Not only because of that, but because of the senseless tragedy that began it all. Number 2, the murder of Dimebag Darrell. This one is exceptionally scary considering, to its point, and really just up until recently, this was one of the only moments exhibited where a musician has ever been murdered on stage while performing. Of course, most metal fans know the story that Nathan Gale stormed the stage during a Damageplan set and opened fire, hitting Dimebag Darrell and eventually killing him before being killed by a security official. And the reason that he did all of this was centered around the breakup of Pantera, centered around a lot of the media hype that he had read on the internet and other sources about how the band's dissolution had come to be and who was really to blame for it. He was so motivated that he went to the show that was in Ohio, opened fire, and killed a heavy metal legend. But what could possibly be worse than that? Unfortunately, it's something that also involves people at a concert. People that were just going out for a day, for a night, to celebrate music, and having it end in absolute horror. Number 1, and also, sadly, the most recent event on this list, the Eagles of Death Metal terrorist incident. The Bataclan in France has hosted many famous shows for many famous groups. It's considered to be a celebratory spot of music in Paris. However, in early November of 2015, it was the scene of terror as terrorists entered into the arena and held the people within the arena hostage, killing many of them. This was a part of a series of attacks that took place in the Paris region during this afternoon and evening. It's considered to be one of the worst incidents to ever happen at a concert event, and it's still one of the scariest moments that we think about to this day, not only because of its recent nature, but because of the overall idea of going to a show to enjoy yourself, to support the band that you love the most, supporting the arts, supporting something that should be free and devoid of really any sort of political ramifications, but getting the dose of reality of the world that we live in these days. That illusion of safety that we all feel that we have whenever we go to an event such as this was fractured that day. And now people might be going to shows or perhaps thinking twice before going to shows out of fear for their own life. The Eagles of Death Metal were able to survive this incident, and the Eagles of Death Metal have done a lot to describe it, not to mention also pay tribute to it. It really showcases that even though the Eagles of Death Metal are technically not even a death metal band or a metal band in general, they really secured themselves as a member of the heavy metal universe, as a member of what we typically stand for, which is, despite all the messages that you hear in lyricism, we are a united bunch. We're a bunch that likes to stay together, and we're a bunch that likes to help one another out. And that's exactly what the Eagles of Death Metal did that night. There were many fans that were extremely scared that the Eagles of Death Metal and their staff were able to help out of the back of the building. That way they could avoid a potential fate that sadly befell many of their other fellow concertgoers. Many died during this event. However, eventually the horror did end. But it makes you think. So regardless to whether or not the Eagles of Death Metal in your mind are a rock band, a metal band, or a polka band, whenever it comes to what they did that night to help out, during a moment of absolute tragedy and absolute horror, they are a metal band today. There you have it, 10 times that heavy metal has sadly made the news in a less than positive light. there's any opportunities or any moments that were missed, please post them in the comments below. Perhaps we will supplement this video with 10 more if there are enough. I am CoverKillerNation, and I will talk to you guys later.